And I'd like to now bring up another interesting place that you're finding descendants of the Israelites, but may not necessarily be from the 10 tribes, but will also play a role. And it shouldn't be overlooked. It's a very serious scenario, is in Africa. Africa has perhaps hundreds of millions of people with this identity right now of being from the people of Israel. Does that mean they were from the 10 tribes? Likely not. We were taught by the historians and within our own traditions that when the Romans conquered Judea a few hundred years after that the tribes of Israel went into exile, perhaps millions of Judeans were sold into slavery, into Africa, into Rome, deep into Africa. And if you look now, you're seeing people who are most likely the descendants of those slaves who kept true. I'd like to bring up a few specific examples because they're going to be game changers. One of them wrote letters to Israel when it became a state. And they said, we're Israelites out in Africa. You know, everyone laughed at them and they said, African Israelites, these people are just trying to jump on the first world country bandwagon. They're living in a third world country. They got nothing. We're coming to Israel. We got innovation, technology. So they're trying to get on this train because there's such a thing called the right of return. All descendants of the Jewish people from around the world are able to move to Israel. So they said we are also. And everyone kind of laughed at them, like I said. And a few people took it serious and went out there and started studying them, learned about their culture. And a professor from Duke University went out there and did DNA testing on them. And he showed not only do they share Semitic genes from people who were in Yemen and back to the Middle East, these gentlemen, a large percent of them, have the Y chromosome to be Kohanim, to be priests. Now, if anyone who doesn't know, a priest is a specific family clan of the nation of Israel who come from Aaron, the brother of Moses, who was the first priest. And anyone descended from Aaron has the status title priest. And we found that these men in this village in South Africa called Lemba, L-E-M-B-A, carry this genetic marker. That's mind-blowing. So everyone kind of got humbled a little bit who laughed at them and said, now what? Now what do we do about this? This could have tremendous implications. Another area in Africa you have something big happening is in Nigeria. You have the Igbo people, or Igbo, pronounced either way. There's 40 million of them. Also Christians, like I spoke about before, how that could happen to the children of Israel very easily. But also a lot of them are now coming out and converting back or adopting the rules of the Torah without all the paganism that they've been practicing for hundreds of years. There's been books written about it from scholars in Nigeria, from scholars from the Jewish people. And where it gets interesting is, in America, there was a slave trade. And a lot of the slaves, a very high percentage of them, came from Western Nigerian ports. And in America today, you see a very large movement of African Americans who say that they're the real chosen people, that they're the children of Israel, they're the Judeans. You know, so what are they just trying to create an identity for themselves because they were slaves, or is there really something here? And the answer is, most likely there is something there. And most likely, maybe that they were the original Israelites, and maybe that the Jewish people today who are white, Caucasian people came in a little bit later on. We know that some of the greatest sages of the transmission of the Torah were converts from Rome. You have a man named Onkelos who wrote a commentary on the Torah, unprecedented, that we still learn today. He was a convert. Some of the largest pillars on the transmission today were Roman converts. So here we are, we're Caucasian Jewish people, and now you have people in Africa saying that they're the real people of Israel. It can't be ruled out at all. We know they were sold into slavery. We know now that they're fulfilling prophecies by saying, we're coming back.
Hi, this is Pastor Joe Green, head pastor of Antioch Assembly Church located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, also the founder of the 2019 movement, and I want to share a couple of thoughts with you. I'm really excited about the season that we're in, especially if you have been following the 2019 movement and understanding prophetically and where we're at, especially people of color. I think not only for people of color in America, but also America itself. And so I want to share a couple of thoughts and why I think that this is such an important time that we're in. This message is about lost inheritance and regaining a lost inheritance. And so when you understand the Bible's a book of patterns, it gives us patterns. The Bible says so that we know how to live in these last days. When you find the patterns and how things have operated historically and biblically, then we can tap into those patterns and we can receive the blessings that God has promised us. I want to say before I go forward is that not realizing the blessings and the promises that God has given us doesn't make you more spiritual. It doesn't make you more closer to God. It actually makes you further away, because if God gives us promises, if he makes covenant with us and he blesses us in certain areas and he has given us an inheritance, then it is in our best interest for us to receive that. It's called a gift, and just like with any gift, if God gives you a gift or if anybody gives you a gift and you don't receive that gift, then you're not doing you're doing a disservice to the gift giver. So let's look at some patterns here. So in Genesis 15, you have this. Well, first in Genesis 12, you have God giving a promise to Abraham. He says, "I'll bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. Through your seed, all the nations of the world will be blessed." And if you understand that Abraham was in Ur of the Chaldees, also known as Babylon. He was under Babylon with King Nimrod. Now, King Nimrod was a grandson of Ham, who was one of the three sons of Noah. And throughout the scriptures, you always see this interaction between Shem and Ham. Throughout history, you see Shem and Ham interacting. And if you didn't know, Ham, of course, were the dark-skinned, the originator of the dark-skinned races, and Shem was brown or red races, the originator of those races. Japheth, of course, was the son of Noah, who was the predecessor of the white races. So Japheth migrated into the north, into Europe. Shem and Ham hovered around the Middle East and even into Africa. And then you also have people that migrated to Asia as well. But so when you understand that Nimrod, who was the leader of Babylon, was a descendant of Ham, the Canaanites were descendants of Ham. Canaan was the youngest son of Ham. And also Mizraim is a grandson of Ham as well. Mizraim, many of you may not recognize that name, but that is Egypt. And so not only is Egypt or Mizraim a descendant of Ham, but the word and the name Egypt represents bondage. So anytime you see the word Egypt, there's a physical place called Egypt. There was a person who originated the nation of Egypt, which was Mizraim, also known as Egypt. And then you have the spiritual Egypt, which represents bondage. And that's going to be important as we go forward in this talk. So the promise to Abraham was that through his family, all the nations, all the families of the earth would be blessed. There's a 400-year prophecy that God gives Abraham in Genesis 15. He says, for 400 years, your descendants will go into Egypt, and then I will deliver them with great wealth or great substance, the Bible says. So Abraham, his seed goes into Egypt. The 400-year time is up. And so God sends the Messiah through Moses. Now again, if you recall, at Babylon, that was the land that Abraham dwelt in, his family dwelt in, and that was the land of the descendants of Ham, and Abraham was a descendant of Shem. So in Israel, Egypt, Israel was in Egypt, and again we have Shem and Ham connecting, and so after a certain period of time, Israel is in bondage in Egypt, and so God sends a deliverer through Moses, and Moses delivers Israel from Egypt. And if you recall, there was a great transference of wealth. So the Egyptians had to give up a lot of their wealth to Israel. Israel goes in the wilderness for 40 years. God gives them his Torah, or his word, his law. And then finally, they enter into the promised land. They're there for a period of time. God sends the Messiah, Jesus, after a 400-year period from the Old to the New Testament. So you have the Gospels. Jesus comes in. The same pattern happens, is that Herod, who was a type of Pharaoh, who was a type of Antichrist, a world leader, he looks to destroy the prophecy that God has given to his people of deliverance and through great wealth. And so what does this globalist world leader do? He attacks the families. He attacks the males. There was economic oppression through taxation. You know, in Egypt, they were economically oppressed through having to do hard labor without the resources to do it. And they were in bondage then. And so you see the same pattern that happens. Then Jesus is born, of course, and Jesus and his family does what? They flee from Herod when Jesus was a very small child. They go into Egypt to hide. Now, it's important to understand that Ham, of course, was the dark-skinned race. So Mizraim, or Egypt, represented dark-skinned people, so or people of color. So if Moses goes there and he hides, well, Moses, when he was born, he lives in Pharaoh's house as Pharaoh's grandson, so he would have had physical attributes that were similar to Pharaoh's, obviously. If Jesus and his family goes and hides in Egypt, they must have somewhat, resembled the people of that land, and so this is a pattern that we see here. Now, after Israel Israel's in the Promised Land, they're in Jerusalem for a period of time. Then after the Messiah is resurrected, after Jesus is crucified and resurrected, Israel again turns away from the law of God. They reject the Messiah, and then in 70 A.D., the Romans come from the north and they pillage Jerusalem. They take the temple apart. They take all the gold. They ravage. They take all the treasure, because the temple in Jerusalem was a magnificent sight. King Solomon, if you're familiar with Solomon was able to build the temple, and it was just a magnificent sight. Gold, precious metals, cedar wood. It was just an incredible and a large structure. So the Romans come in. They take all the gold and all the treasure, the metals, the precious metals, the resources out of the temple. They take it apart. And so now you have these Israelites here that are Hebrew people in Jerusalem. They get taken into captivity. Some of them flee south into Africa. And so some of them flee, and there's various tribes that have been found to be of Semitic descent. And so let me find this article here. You have the chance to, you can look the article for yourself as well. So this is an article. It says British scientists have confirmed with DNA testing that African tribes in northern South Africa are Semitic people. They are actually Semitic people. They are descendants of Abraham. And here's some of the other tribes that they found spread out throughout Africa, because one of the curses of God's people was that they would be spread out through all the nations of the world. It's called the diaspora. They were spread out from Jerusalem, and they had to flee. So here's some of the tribes. The Beta Israel tribe of Ethiopia, the Abayuda tribe of Uganda, the Tutsi tribe of Rwanda. And if you recall that there was a time when the Hutus and the Tutsis were at war in Rwanda, there was a great massacre there. The Rusapi tribe of Zimbabwe, the Lemba tribe of South Africa, the Sefwi tribe of Ghana, Ashanti tribe of Ghana, the Ui tribe of Ghana, the B'nai Ephraim tribe of Nigeria, the Lam tribe of Timbuktu, the Katsina tribe of Nigeria, the Zafin Ibrahim tribe of the Malagasy Republic, and the Ibu tribe of Nigeria. All of these tribes, through DNA testing, have been confirmed to be of Semitic origin, which means they were descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So this was through DNA testing. They find this Y chromosome that is common in Semitic people. So this confirms when I'm telling you that many of these Hebrews that were not only people of color, but they fled south into Africa and West Africa. We also have on the west coast of Africa, in Ghana and some of these places, you had these tribes of dark, brown and black Hebrew people that were taken captive by the other African nations. And so now you have the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade. So the transatlantic slave trade wasn't just people from Africa, but more specifically, many of these people that were taken in the transatlantic slave trade were actually Hebrew people. And so these other African nations were enslaving Hebrew people, and they sold them into slavery. And so, sometimes we believe or think that like the Europeans just went into Africa and just start snatching people off the street and throwing them on ships. That's not the case. Most of the people that they got from Africa were people that were already being enslaved by other African tribes. So they just made deals with them, and sometimes they traded for weapons or they traded for things from Europe with these African tribes, and in return they were sold these slaves. And like I said, it's reported that many of them were actually Hebrew people that were enslaved. So another interesting thing, and we're going to go to Revelation 2 and 3, chapter 2 and chapter 3. But I want you to understand that there is a group of people, we call them the Illuminati. Some people call them...
All right, we're here at the gate of no return. As you can see, here in Ouida, Benin. So this is where, during slavery, so the slaves were sold here.
No, they leave Africa.
They leave Africa here.
For the lifetime without any hope to a deadly and hardly destiny.
The Kabbalists, they are what's called Ashkenazi Jews. So the Rothschild family, the international bankers, and many other people are actually called Ashkenazi Jews. And so I'm going to share who they are. But let's go to Revelation chapter 2 and Revelation chapter 3 so we can get some insight. Because again, we're talking about lost inheritance. We're talking about how that these people are not receiving, people of color are not receiving their God-given destiny that has been promised to them, their God-given inheritance. So let me look through my notes here. So in Revelation chapter 2, beginning with verse 8, it says, "And an angel of the church in Smyrna write, These things says the first and the last who was dead and came to life. I know your works and tribulation and poverty." It says you're rich, but right now you're in poverty. "I know the blasphemy of those who say that they are Jews, but they are not, but they are the synagogue of Satan. Do not fear any of those things which are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you in prison that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful until death, and I will give you a crown of life. He who has ears, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death." Now, in Revelation chapter 3, beginning with verse 9, it says, "Indeed, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie. Indeed, I will make them come and worship before your feet, and to know that I have loved you." So we're talking about the Illuminati, which are Ashkenazi Jews. They are Kabbalists. So they don't actually practice true Judaism. They practice Jewish mysticism. So Jewish mysticism, also known as Kabbalah, is a pagan religion that Israel picked up when they were in captivity in Babylon. And again, we recognize that Nimrod and the Tower of Babel was the origination of all the pagan religions of the world. So it says here that there's a group called the Synagogue of Satan that say that they're Jews, but they're not. They're lying. So we understand that they know that they are not actual physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So there's an article that I want to share with you that was in the Los Angeles Times, and this article was September the 9th, 2014. So this article of the New York Times in 2019 confirms that 80% of the people that are called Ashkenazi Jews are not actual physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And why is that important? It's not important in one aspect because of the fact that God says that all the nations, all the families of the world will have access to him through Abraham's seed. Because of the new birth and the resurrection, we're all grafted into the family of God. But more importantly, even from the time of the Exodus, in Exodus 12, when God gave the commandment for the Passover, he says if a stranger or a foreigner desires to enter into covenant, then they can enter into covenant. The males had to be circumcised, and then it was the same as though they were born a Jew. So you have to recognize the fact that no matter what, if someone is following Torah, they are considered, children of God. Now, why is that important? That's important because, as I stated, that these Kabbalists, these people that are called the Synagogue of Satan, they don't follow Torah-based Judaism. They actually follow the Babylonian Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud, again, this is what they picked up when they were in Babylon, which is a bastardized form of Judaism. So it says here, September 9th, 2014, this article by Karen Kaplan, it says, DNA ties Ashkenazi Jews to a group of 330 people from the Middle Ages. Now, again, we're talking about the Illuminati. We're talking about these Kabbalists that are actually from this region of Turkey. In the Bible, in the book of Revelation, it says Pergamon or Pergamos. So Pergamos was in the Caucasoid Mountains of Turkey, which is this group called the Khazars. The Khazars originated from this region, and they adopted a form of Judaism, Talmudic Judaism, not Torah-based Judaism. And of course, you are familiar with the fact that Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible, also known as the Law of Moses. It's the foundation for Israel, the Torah. So these people didn't adapt Torah-based Judaism. They adopted Kabbalah. These are the people that we call the Illuminati, also known as the Rothschilds. So this article in the LA Times, it confirms the fact. It says the Ashkenazi Jews alive today can trace their roots to 330 people who lived 600 to 800 years ago. It says that a new study in the Journal of Nature Communications, an international team of scientists, sequenced the complete genomes of 128 healthy Ashkenazi Jews and compared each of those sequences with others, as well as the DNA of 26 Flemish people from Belgium. And it confirms that these people are Ashkenazi and that they are not physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, the reason that is an interesting fact for us to share is because Ashkenaz was the son of Gomer, and he is the grandson of Japheth. So Japheth represents the European race, people that migrated into Europe. The Scythians, the Slavs, and all these other people, they are actually descendants of Japheth. And so we know that Abraham was a Shem. He was from the line of Shem. So you have these people that are Ashkenazi Jews, these Kabbalists, these Illuminati people that are in charge of the world banking system, and et cetera, et cetera. They were actually the ones who were primarily the ones who benefited from the transatlantic slave trade. So what did they do? They got these dark-skinned, brown-skinned Hebrew people from Africa. They transported them across the transatlantic in slave ships, and they made a profit off of them. So it's important for us to understand it, and the reason being is because, like I said, this inheritance that is attached to God's people, the wealth that they are receiving, they have to understand who they are in order for them to fulfill their end of the bargain. And so following God's law or his Torah gives the blessings to his people. And as opposed to violating God's Torah, and when you violate God's Torah, you actually miss the blessings, which is why God gave the commandments to Israel. And in Deuteronomy chapter 28, there's a whole list of curses that come as a result of violating God's commandments. So God says in Deuteronomy chapter 28, if you heed my voice and follow my commandments, then I'll give you victory over all your enemies. I will bless the work of your hand. All your storehouses and everything will be full with goods. So there's financial prosperity that comes with following God's Torah. As far as military and coming into contact with other nations, they would have victory. If you recall, when Israel went to Jericho, Rahab the prostitute said, "We heard about you guys and how you have victory. Your God's with you, and you have victory over all these other nations." She gets adopted into the family of Israel. She's in the lineage of King David because of her desire to covenant. Ruth and Naomi. Ruth was a Moabitess. She wasn't a physical descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. She went into covenant with Naomi. She marries Boaz. She's listed in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. the Messiah and King David. So that was always the case with God, but it was always based on and contingent upon keeping the Torah, keeping God's commandments and his laws. So in in Deuteronomy 28, it gives a whole list of curses. And one of the things that was very interesting, one of the specific curses mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 28 was that they would be taken back into Egypt on ships. Now, why is that important? That's important because if you understand the nature of slavery, there's been slavery since the beginning of time. But the only time that the slave trade took place based on ships was during the transatlantic slave trade. And again, as I mentioned, Egypt is a name for a physical place, but it's also bondage or slavery. So what God says here, this is in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68, and the Lord will take you back in bondage in ships. By the way, which I said to you, you shall never see it again. And so they go, so this is, to me, it's a demonstration of, or a prophecy of the transatlantic slave trade, which was a time where these people that were of Hebrew descent, these people of color, were actually taken into captivity on slave ships. Again, these were all curses that God says that will happen to his people. So let me read a couple of the other curses. Verse 33 of Deuteronomy chapter 28, a nation whom you've not known shall eat the fruit of your land and produce of your labor, and you shall be only oppressed and crushed. Verse 36, the Lord will bring you in a king who you set over you to a nation where neither your fathers have known. Verse 41 of Deuteronomy 28, you shall have sons and daughters, but they shall not be yours, for they shall go into captivity. Verse 43, the alien who's among you shall rise higher and higher above you, and you shall come lower and lower. So all these are curses that that God has promised that will happen when his people turn away from the Torah. So in Romans 11, but it also talks about the fact that there's a blindedness that God allows on his people for the Gentiles. And it also, it says that the riches of the Gentiles happens as a result of the blindedness of God's people. But it also says he will not forsake the original branches, but they will be restored. And so the time after the time of the Gentiles is complete, because he allows the Gentiles to be wealthy to provoke Israel to jealousy. And so if you think about it, the economic oppression that has happened to people of color, whether they be in Africa or whether they be in the United States. In the United States, we were the #2 minority group, but now we're down to 3 or 4. If you look at economically, we are the low man on the total pole as in regards to owning a property or having wealth or all these type of things. And I would say to you that based on the Word of God and the prophetic utterances of the Word of God, this is all a result of turning away from God's Torah. But of course, as we mentioned, the 400-year cycle is about to become complete, because in 1619 the first people were transported from Africa on the transatlantic slave trade. So if that is the case, then 2019 represents the 400-year pattern coming to an end. And so I believe that this is the time that God's people are waking up, those people of color that are actually descendants of God's people, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, through the lineage of the Messiah. And because of that, there will be a great transference of wealth once we come into the knowledge of who we are and return back to God's Torah, his teaching and instruction. And so this is a strategic time, I believe, because the patterns are undeniable. If you look at slavery, the transatlantic slave trade, they were run by these globalist Ashkenazi Jews, right? So they profited off of the transportation of people of color. And again, if you were to go back to my theory that they are Hebrew people, that they are Israel, then that's the case, that they are profiting off of the wealth or the riches of the Gentiles. If you understand that in major sports, so you have the NFL and the NBA, is 70 to 80% of those in these sports are people of color, but yet they don't own the NBA or the NFL. The owners are primarily Europeans, and many of them are what you would call Ashkenazi Jews. If you look in Hollywood, it's the same thing. The people that own the studios are Ashkenazi Jews, even though people of color have contributed a lot to the success of movies and the entertainment industry. Music, especially. If you think about hip-hop, hip-hop was started by people of African or people of color. If you understand that all popular music now, whether it's pop music, rock and roll, jazz, reggae, hip-hop, R&B, all of these genres of music stem from the creation of people of color. But they don't own the studios, they don't own the distribution. Some of them own labels, but if you look at the structure of the label, of the business structure, they all are under the umbrella of someone who is not of color. So they are profiting off of the people of color. And again, if you look at what the Bible says, and I know this isn't a popular thing to talk about, that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge it, but it's very clear throughout the scripture that when we turn away from God's commandments and his laws, that there's a punishment because of it. It says that you will be a byword and a curse word throughout all the nations of the earth. And I was reading this book. It talks about how every nation in the earth has a negative word for people of color. In the United States, we have the N word. In other cultures, they have, even in Asia, they have a N word equivalent for people of color, and that's one of the curses that will happen to God's people. There's a book called The 13th Tribe, and it's written by Arthur Kessler, and in it he talks about the fact that these Ashkenazi Jews, these Khazarians, let me read a little bit of this off the back cover. It says, the book traces the history of the ancient Khazars, Khazar Emperor, a major but almost forgotten power in Eastern Europe, which in the Dark Ages became converted to Judaism. Khazaria was finally wiped out by the forces of Genghis Khan, but evidence indicates that the Khazars themselves migrated to Poland and formed the cradle of Western Jewry. And so they flourish today in many different, in banking, they went into Germany, and now you see them being the head of many, many different industries. Parts of industry. So I believe that there's an awakening that's happening. I believe that God's people will come into the realization of who they are, that we will turn back to Torah. I've been studying Torah for about 13 years now, and when I first went to a Passover Seder, I knew that there was a connection there. I really felt it deep in my spirit that this was something I was supposed to do. So I've been teaching and following Torah for some time, and now God has given me even deeper understanding and revelation as to why it is that we have that connection. There's a couple of videos that I'm going to share with you. One, there is a Ashkenazi Jew, European Jew, who acknowledges the fact that the DNA evidence shows that these people of color are actually originally Hebrew people. There's also a couple of videos and some books that you can read about the slave trade and how it was run by Ashkenazi Jews. They ran the shipping industry at the time, and many other facts. These are all historical. This is not a knock on anybody, because God is no respecter of persons, and the reason they're called the Synagogue of Satan is because these New World Order globalists acknowledge that it is Lucifer who they are trying to push a New World Order, and Lucifer is the head of what they follow and what they believe in. There's many of their writers and many of their famous people that have acknowledged that Lucifer is the one they follow after. And this goes back to the Garden of Eden, when the serpent gave them secret knowledge, they believe. And so the Khazars were actually the serpent cult that supposedly converted to Judaism, but it wasn't a real Judaism. It was this Jewish mysticism that they learned from Babylon, ancient Babylon. So anyway, just stay tuned. We have a whole lot more. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please go on to the 2019movement.org, YouTube, Facebook, and all these other social media sites so that you can stay connected, because I'm very excited about what God is going to do. I know that this is a strategic time, and God is going to do something amazing once we reconnect to who we are, our identity, and understand who we are. And because again, God, not only does he bless his people for turning back to his way, his righteousness, but he also blesses the nation for how they treat him, or he punishes nations for mistreating his people. And so again, it is important for people of color to understand their identity, not just for their culture, but for the nation as a whole. Until next time, be blessed of the Lord. I love you. In the name of Messiah, Yeshua, shalom, shalom.
Obadiah Yisrael of the Hebrew Israelites in Chicago points out that one of the facts Scriptures gives us about Israel in regard to their physical appearance is that Israel is described as physically looking like the sons of Ham in appearance. Ham was one of Noah's 3 sons. Shem and Japheth were the other 2. Noah's descendants repopulated the earth after the Great Flood. Ham's descendants are traced to the families of Africa. Ham, Quam in Hebrew, means black, hot, and burnt. Ham had 4 sons: Cush, Ethiopians, Cushites, and Nubians; Mizraim, Egyptians and Kemet; and Phut, ancient Somalia. All 4 of Ham's sons and their descendants settled in and around the continent of Africa. This includes the so-called Middle East, which is also part of the continent of Africa. Ham's sons are the people of the African continent, the ancient Egyptians, Ethiopians, Somalians, Canaanites, etc. This is a historical depiction of the Jews during the Babylonian period, clearly showing the African racial origins that many believe originated out of Egypt and was followers of the Akhenaten religion. This is a statue of the boy king, King Tut. This statue was found in his tomb among many of the treasures in Egypt during an archaeological excavation in 1922. Scholars say King Tut was on the throne of Egypt a few years before the Israelites' Eurocentric Christian world knows nothing about the real Jesus from the tribe of Judah, the Ethiopian who spoke Aramaic. According to Hebrews 7:14, the tribe of Judah, from whom whence Jesus, or Yeshua, his Hebrew name, came, is a dark-skinned nation of people. However, as Europe prospered, it presented the global world with a white Jesus around the time when the Bible was being translated from Hebrew to Greek to Latin to English.
Egypt, if you look in a very good dictionary, you will see the word Egypt means a condition of slavery. And because slavery was the key element in that country, when they formed the New World and they gave the New World names to these countries, they named it Egypt, associating it with the condition. So, keep that in mind, that Egypt is a condition of slavery. Remember, the children of Israel was in slavery in Egypt, okay? The Mizraim. The 68th verse, the last verse in that chapter says, this is because we disobey, and Yahweh will bring you back to Egypt, which means condition of slavery, by ships. On a journey I said you should never make again. You remember when Moses stood at the Red Sea and he stretched his rod and he said to the children of Israel, the Egyptians you see today, you will see them no more forever. That's the covenant that Yahweh made, that he shall not turn back. But because they disobey, he's going to bring them back. He brought us back. Ladies and gentlemen, there you will offer yourselves for sale as male and female slaves to your enemies, but no one will buy you. It's all in Scripture. Our people, the true Hebrew Israelites, are black people, because the Scripture says we will be brought into slavery by ships. And all over the world, there is no one, no people, no nation on the face of this earth was ever taken into slavery by ships but Hebrew Israelites, African people.
Deuteronomy 28:68, and Yah shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. According to verse 68, Israel will go into a repressive, brutal bondage similar to what was experienced when held captive in Egypt. Only this time ships will be the major transportation method used to move the Israelites to their new dwelling places.
I've known in my heart for a very long time that I need to go to the Holy Land. My mother's father had always proudly affirmed that he was a true black Judean. This journey was an ancestral calling to rectify the fallacies that have been perpetuated about this biblically historic land, its region, the people who claim to be its original inhabitants, and the people who have in fact lived on the land for generations upon generations. Introduce yourself and give us a brief understanding of your connection to the Holy Land.
I am Sar Madiel Ben Yehuda. Sar means minister. My title in the community, my role is minister. My portfolio is that of information. I'm charged to collect, to analyze, and then to disseminate information about the Hebrew Israelites here in Israel, about our particular history as a community and our history as a people connecting back to this land. We consider Israel to be Northeast Africa. We are living here in the southern portion of Israel in what is known as the southern Judean mountains. And of course, we have to make this clear that Israel predates any Palestinian connections here to this land. When you look at the name of Palestine, it was the name that the Romans gave to the land formerly known as Judea. Now, I didn't say Jewish or Judaism, but Judea. So the Judeans were the people that actually lived in this portion of this land prior to it being named Palestine by the Romans. So this is what we consider to be Northeast Africa. We are sitting on the African tectonic plate. There are African species of birds and animals and plants that you'll find all throughout this region.
Why I took you here is that I want to show you that the country called Israel is sitting on the African tectonic plate. It's like all continents are sitting on a plate, okay? And these plates, sometimes they slide in, you know, and they rub one another. And see, and what happens, that's what happens when earthquakes happen. The plates begin to slide among one another. And if you get a crack in one of the plates, magma will come up, you know, like a volcano. A magnum would come up, and it will cause, you know, great devastation because of the volcano, but it's because of the shifting of these tectonic plates.
Without question, we are in Northeast Africa. We are landlocked to Egypt, with the exception of the Suez Canal, which was a man-made ditch, a boundary now between, in fact, it's not even really a boundary anymore since Egypt has reclaimed the Sinai Peninsula. But nevertheless, even those of us who are Pan-Africanists in our thinking and Afrocentric, we forget and we leave off that portion of Northeast Africa and don't want to claim anything beyond that. Of course, Afrocentrists are still fighting tooth and nail for Egypt to be included as a part of Africa, because most Egyptologists and anthropologists, archaeologists of the Eurocentric persuasion will say that Egypt is in Africa. They had to concede that, but then they still draw the line by saying that they weren't Africans like that. In other words, they weren't dark-skinned people. And of course, this is all part of the Great Deception. And the reality is that if they give up Egypt, ancient Kemet, if they give that up and say that that was a part of black Africa, then they will also have to give up Israel. And that's why they draw the line at Egypt, because if they give up Egypt, they've got to give up Israel.
Now, we're going to go over here, and I'm going to show you where Israel sits on the African tectonic plate, which means that Israel is Northeast Africa. Now, when we look at this map, this is the Sinai, okay? This is the Red Sea. This is Egypt. This is the Sinai. This is Israel. All right, this is Saudi Arabia over here. Now, if you see this in Hebrew, it says Haluach Afrikani, the African plate. Here it is right here. Israel is sitting right here. Israel is sitting on the Haluach HaAfrikani, which means that Israel is northeast Africa.
There is no Middle East area. If you sit here in Israel, you have a border with Egypt. So Egypt is in Africa. So how I can say this is Middle East? To me, it's Africa land. Blacks from Africa back to home, and also from Africa, from here, we've been there. And also, for most of the blacks, they have a confusion about Israel. This is your home. This is your land. I start from zero to know who am I. After that, I hear from the cousins, I am a Jewish, I have a full right to come in Israel. I am sitting here 22 years. So from Bible also, you learn most of the history and the Bible of the prophets or the people inside the Bible. They are not blondes or blue eyes. They are looks like me or looks like you. So I believe this is the land of Africa.
So in your eyes, this land, the Holy Land, what they call Israel, Palestine, this is Africa?
This is Africa. This is Africa.
The Europeans, I mean, because we know the Europeans classify this as the Middle East. But this is Africa.
This is Africa. This is north of Africa. Now they make Libya and Morocco and Tunis, they say it North Africa. It's west, the west. We are in the north.
This is the Mediterranean Sea right here. So people say, well, why do you say, but it's Asia Minor? You know, when Europeans be talking about this Asia Minor, I ask them, where's Europe Minor? Where's America Minor? Okay, this is the only continent with a minor. And you know what that minor is? It's a minor lie. It's really a major lie. Understand what you're talking about? Some Asia Minor. Where's Europe Minor? Where's America Minor? But see, when they say Asia Minor, they don't have to classify this land as being part of the African continent. And they want to call it the Middle East. The middle of what? Okay? The only reason why they call this the Middle East is because people here in England, when they would come down into the Mediterranean Sea and go through the Suez Canal, go into the Red Sea and go to Far East, go to China, they were saying they was in the middle of their journey.
We've done a great job in being able to demonstrate that this is Northeast Africa. And once we begin to look at it as such and we stop believing this idea of Israel being a part of the Middle East. What do you mean Middle East? Is there an Upper East, a Lower East? What do you mean Middle East? It's a geopolitical term that the British, our good friends the British, that they used during their reign and their dominion, which has long since passed. The sun has long set on the British Empire. They no longer rule the 7 seas, but they, in their world, in their worldview, they called this region the Middle East, and it made sense in that perspective, because going to their east, when they got as far as they could to their east, and they call that the Far East, and to this day it's still called the Philippines, China, Asia, or Far East Asia, whatever. So when you look at going to those regions and passing through this region, passing through Syria, passing through Israel, passing through Egypt, passing through Afghanistan, Iran, etc., it made sense according to their worldview to call this the Middle East. It was the middle of their East. But no longer will a geopolitical term suffice for what we're saying is geological and geographical truth.
Europeans classified this area as a Middle East. You know, and then since this is the Middle East, the other question, where the Middle West? Where the Middle North and where the Middle South? They don't have no geographical terms like that. And the only reason why they use that term, Middle East, because it disconnects the proper connotation that should go with describing this land geographically.
So to me, what I understood, also I learned in Ethiopia what is the geography of Africa and Middle East, automatically I feel like Africa. So even now, after 22 years, I saw the culture, I saw the meal, you know, most of, there is no Middle East culture. All of these things came from Africa and also from this culture, or originally from here, from this land, from Jerusalem. And now to see the things properly Africa, not Middle East.
So let the truth speak for itself. It's not my interpretation. Here it is in Hebrew. This is written in Hebrew.
And in Hebrew that says?
This says Luach HaAfrikani, the African tectonic plate. That's where Israel is sitting on.